Hey there, I'm Matt Hanlon, a longtime software engineer, teacher, coach, and I'm going to walk you through how to create an app walkthrough in Swift Playgrounds today. App walkthroughs are an amazing way to basically pretend like you have a senior software engineer sitting beside your learners that walks them through the code. For example, I have this one here that I authored myself, my closet. And you may or may not have seen this. This is a feature of Swift Playgrounds 4 where basically we have somebody advising us on the code that we're looking at. So it's a great way to get someone up to speed very quickly and focus their eye on certain parts of the code. I use it all the time when I'm working with students, especially when I know that I'm going to have to leave them. This is a great artifact to leave behind with them so that they can kind of keep working through things while I'm not with them. Now, there was an excellent WWDC series or session a few years ago that explained to you just how to make this kind of content for your Swift Playgrounds app. And now I'm going to walk you through kind of how it actually works in practice, because the video is brilliant and there's so much good stuff in it. But you're missing that one step. There's a few things that you have to wrestle with just to make sure that your walkthrough is going to show up. It's not maybe the easiest environment to author content in. So there'll be a bit of trial and error, I'm sure, as you're working through this. But this will at least get you started out of the gate. So first things first, I'm going to start with a brand new app. Imagine I'm dreaming up some app where I'm going to give this off to some students. I'm going to have a walkthrough that guides them through all the code, and I'm going to start from complete scratch. So I'm just going to open that up. I'm not going to bother renaming it right now. First thing we're going to do is we need to do a little bit of reorganization of our files. So I'm going to go up to the sidebar here and open that up. This is great. I have my content view and my app file. And if I go up to the plus document button, if I tap on that, I'm going to choose to add a folder. And I'm going to add two folders here. I'm going to add the app folder. And then I'm going to go up again and I'm going to add another folder. And this one's going to be called Guide. It may crash just like it did for me there. Don't panic. I've still got my app copy over here. I'll open that back up. I'm going to open up the sidebar again. Now I have my app folder. Now I'm going to try to create my guide folder. I'm going to call it guide. Hit return. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on content view and drag it up to the app folder and drop it in there. And the same with my app, drag it into the app folder. You have to make sure you drop it on the folder. Okay, so that's step one. Now, when we do have a guide, we'll see an additional button over here next to the build situation, as well as the preview. If I tap on preview right now, I'll just get a preview of my app. It's not very exciting. It's got the globe and hello world. So I'm going to go back over to my files. And in its simplest form, we're just going to add a guide, a .tutorial file. So I'm going to actually go up to the plus button again. I'm going to add a text file. And I'm going to call this guide.tutorial. Now, that's going to show up in a new folder here or new section called Resources. I'm going to tap on that. I'm going to drag that up to Guide. Now, if I back out of this, you'll notice that there's no walkthrough menu showing up just automatically. I have to reload this into Swift Playground. So I would hit that back arrow, tap on my app again. Now that I've done that, I do have a little walkthrough icon showing up, and I can tap on that. And there's nothing in the guide. So of course it couldn't display the guide. So we're nearly there. This is actually, we're pretty far along. So in the guide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a little guidebook at the top level. I'm going to give it a title. Let's call it Get Started with App Walkthroughs. We're going to give it an icon. Now, I don't actually have an icon in the project, but we need these parameters. And I'm also going to give it a first file parameter as well. Now, we do have files in the project, so I'm going to point it at my app.swift is the first file it's going to point us at. And so that's the overarching structure of my guidebook. I'm also going to, just so that we see something interesting over in the side there, I'm going to add a few other things. I'm going to hit the tab key. Now I'm working with a keyboard attached to my iPad. You can do the same thing by showing the keyboard and using the tab and everything in there. I'm going to add an @guide. And this takes no parameters, or it doesn't need any parameters, so I'm going to just leave it empty. And I'm going to add my first step. So, and that takes a parameter called title. And we'll just call it the same as we have for the guidebook as a whole. Okay, so get started with app walkthroughs. That's the only parameter we have there for our step directive. And then last but not least, so we have something show up over in the Learning Center there, I'm going to add some content and media. Again, this takes no parameters, just like the guide. And I'm going to just say, and just to tidy things up, I'm going to tab these around. It doesn't matter where the braces are. But with this basic guide in place, and in particular, making sure that I have a title, icon, background, and first file parameter for my guidebook, if I go up and I hit the back arrow, and then I launch that playground again, we can see that now I've got my content in the Learning Center. So I'm well on my way. I've got my preview over here. If I tap on those books, that's where I can go through my walkthrough and I can write loads more text. If I just tap on the guide, this is where I can flesh it out a little bit, add more steps, add tasks for students to accomplish. Tasks are able to point at different files so that that's where we can highlight different lines in the file. And they give you a lot more detail in that WWDC talk from 2022. So I highly recommend checking that out. Now, there are some other features like you can add a welcome message and all sorts of other interesting things. I don't have that enabled just yet. And when I want to make the next step, say I want to add resources, like I want to add an icon.png or a background.png, so it actually adds a bit of color over there in my Learning Center, I'm going to need to work on that in the file system. Because if I go over to the sidebar and I try to create a new folder called resources in here, that's where I would put my images for the guide. And I go to the plus button and I say folder, and I say resources. Playgrounds is going to complain and say, it's a reserved name, you can't use resources. So we're going to have to resolve that by going over to the desktop. Now, there are a few ways I can get it over to the desktop. I can airdrop it by going up here to the name and choosing to share. Or I can do as I did the other day. In fact, I'll just airdrop that to myself. And we'll pop over to the desktop and have a look at what we need to do next to add resources and to add things like localized strings and some of the extra issues we might run into. So we'll see you over there. Okay, so we're over here on the desktop. I've just dropped my app copy 15.swift PM to my desktop. This is what I'm going to work with to add the resources folder, and then also add a few other pieces to my my app playground project. So the way I'm going to add this is I'm going to just right click on the file and choose show package contents. I can see that I have a resources folder. I'm going to actually delete that one. I don't need that one now. The Finder is telling me that I can't, so that's fine. We'll leave it as is for now. So if I look in my guide folder, there I have my new folder that I tried to call resources. I'm actually going to hit return now and call that resources. And this is where I could put something like icon.png or background.png if I wanted to have that show up in my user interface. But I'm going to show you one more wrinkle that you might run into, especially if you're adding localized strings. So you expect your app walkthrough to be shown in multiple languages. We need to do a few things to our project file here. So first things first, I'm going to actually open this up in Xcode because that's going to be a far easier way for me to add some of these resources. So if I go back and I right click on this again and I choose open with and choose Xcode, I'm gonna get a message saying this is from the internet. Do you want to make sure you trust it before you open it? Over here in the project navigator, I can see all of my resources. I can try deleting that again just for the sake of cleaning things up. It's not going to let me do it because it's hung up on that. So say I wanted to start thinking about localizing this text. Well, one thing I would do is I would add a new folder under here in resources. So if I right click on resources, I can add a new folder. I can also do this in the Finder. I'm going to call this en.lproj. That just stands for localized project. And the files in there are going to be localized in English. Now, the reason why I'm doing this in Xcode and not in the Finder is because now I can just say I want to create a new file. And I have lots of templates available to me with Xcode. So, for example, I can go here and say I want to add a localizable file. That's not showing up there. So actually it's a strings file that I really want. I'm going to pick the legacy version here. It names it localizable by default. And I'm going to give it a value of, let's go take a look at this. We'll just say we'll localize this piece here. And each line in localizable.strings file is going to end with a semicolon. Now, just a disclaimer, my localizations for my walkthroughs are not working 100%. Sometimes you have to toggle the author debug mode. So you might have to go to settings, playgrounds. There is a toggle that you can turn on and off. I'll show you where it is on the Mac in just a second, on the Mac version of Playgrounds. But as I added this file, if I go tap on this X, Xcode is telling me, and in fact Swift Playgrounds will tell me the same thing, that I need a default localization. As soon as I add localization to my resources, it needs me to give it a hint as to where to go. Now, unfortunately, I can't do that in the user interface here. I could go do this on the command line. But one thing I'm going to do here is show the package contents again of the file. And it's asking me to add it in this Package.swift. So I'm going to double click this file. It's going to open up in Xcode for me. Now it's warning me. So I'm taking fair warning from that. I'll have a look, and the key is called default localization. So we'll bring this over here. I'm just going to add the key here, default localization. We'll follow the structure. If you're not familiar with Package.swift files or even this layout, we're just going to follow basically what we see above. So default localization, colon, en in quotes. Okay, and so now if I close that, you'll notice that the error has gone away. If I want to make sure that everything's clear, sometimes I'll reopen it again with Xcode. I'll tap on the project navigator if it looks like my files are missing. Now that's going to be the big step that you need to take. If you do add one of these localized project folders, you are going to have to be aware that you need to change that package.swift file, which is maybe a little bit more advanced step than you want to take. I'm going to open up this file just by double clicking it. It's going to open up in Playgrounds. That also runs on the Mac, if you weren't aware of that, as well as the iPad. Again, I'll open it because I trust it. I'll get the same interface that I have with the one on the iPad, and I can see my walkthrough just fine again. This might be the way that you prefer to do your work, is stick with Playgrounds. You can also work with it on the Mac. And it's not a bad way to go. And you can still edit all these files, the guide as well, in Playgrounds on the Mac. So maybe this is the way that you're going to approach things. So that's just a little bit of the surgery you might have to perform. If you have a look, I'll give you this example here. I created this playground. It's very similar. It's got a lot more stuff in it. You may get messages like this: failed to create an instance of SPC GuideBook.type. That's not super helpful. Sometimes it's a little bit of trial and error as you're digging through the guide here. I think this particular project has got way too much stuff in it. So if you do get failed to create an instance of SPC GuideBook.type, don't panic. You can see here I've added an @welcome message directive. And if I close this, now that I've cleaned up my guidebook, I'm going to close my app. It's called My App Copy 14. I believe that's this right here. I'm going to open that up. And when I do, I'm still getting that same message. And right now it's all down to this. So if I want to test and see that, yep, that's the issue, I would close that, go back to Finder, open it up again. And okay, there's something with that welcome message. So when I paste it back in, maybe it doesn't need a set of parameters. We can play around with that. But the best way to go and have a look and figure out how someone else has done their own localization and their own extra pages and everything is to go open up one of the other walkthroughs. Here, I'll show you where to find those now. So obviously that's not it. So there's something else. I'm going to open up the main page, Playgrounds. I'm going to go choose See All. And all of these App Gallery ones, they all have walkthroughs. So I'm just going to grab one of them. Maybe we'll grab About Me. We have quite a few copies of those. And on the Mac, anyway, I can go right-click on it and say Show in Finder. It's highlighted it here. I'm actually going to open it up with Xcode so I can browse it a little bit easier. And if I hold down the Alt or Option key and tap on that disclosure arrow, it'll open up everything for me. So here's the app itself. And if I close that, this is the guide with all the different localizations it has. It's got the image. It's got the walkthrough. So I might play around with this and try to figure out, okay, where did I go wrong with my @welcome message? Did it follow the guide? Was it right next to it? I've got my content and media. We can use Markdown format. So if you have a look for Markdown format, you'll be able to insert images like this or refer to the glossary. You can see that appears in the Localized Resources. There are guide buttons. There are tasks of different types, walkthroughs and experiments. There's really a lot of options when it comes to authoring your own walkthroughs, and you can go very, very deep. If you haven't, I would recommend checking out my Adventures Playground feed and some of the ones in the app gallery as well. There's some amazing examples there that will take you through some complex coding concepts and really help your learners out. So hopefully that helped give you an idea of how to author your own app walkthroughs with Swift Playgrounds. Now I can go drop those either in my iCloud Drive for Playgrounds, or I can airdrop them to my iPad or to my students' iPads if I want them to work through the walkthroughs, and we should be good to go. Okay, best of luck with that, and hope to see you soon.